Welcome back to the series, and in this video we're going to finish up all of the wiring. So we're going to take our LS wiring harness, we're going to plug everything in, and then we're going to do all of the under the dashboard connections between the two harnesses. And this should get us very close to getting this vehicle to start. So let's get right into it. So before anything else, I think we should take care of the ground connections. So near the battery box here, you should have a big ground wire that comes from over here. And I've conveniently given you a spot right there on the alternator bracket and the bolt, so you can bolt that ground wire to that. So go ahead and do that. Now when you pulled your Rover V8, there should have been a strap like this tied to the back. It goes from the head to this post over here. You see it? It's got a tiny little nut on it. It's a post on the body. It's kind of dark. Right there. So you can reinstall it if yours is in good condition, or just buy a new one. Just tie the small hole to the post and the bigger hole to the head with any M10 bolts. You can even use the one that was on the Disco. It'll fit. This little stud is also going to have grounds from our wiring harness, so you don't need to tighten it super tight yet. Right, like that. Attached to a bolt hole on the head right here. And that's the bare minimum required for grounds. Of course, you can add more if you want. You can have one going from here to here. But that's pretty much it. The wiring harness has instructions on grounding and everything. You can follow the instructions here too. We are going to be looking through this as well. Next, I would like to button up the air conditioning so I can plug it in. So make sure your two dowel pins are in. Air conditioning goes there. You can give it a gentle tap to help the dowel pins go in. It's okay if they're not in all the way. When you put in the bolts, that'll take care of the rest of it. File down the holes on the bracket if it's not going in very easily. Actually, I might do that. I'm taking a step drill and just gently deburring the edge of it with that. Little tap. Yeah, much better. Now you should have 4 bolts, 90 millimeters long, 2 nuts, and a couple washers. Put washers on 2 of the bolts and put those bolts in the back. So in the back there's a captive nut, which means you don't need to put a nut because there's already one attached to the bracket, which is super nice. The only reason we didn't do that in the front too is because the front has those dowel pins. 2 more washers on 2 more of the bolts. And you'll slot these in the front here. Those bolts will go all the way through. You'll take 2 nuts. Don't worry about the washers because it's just too difficult to put washers going underneath like that with very little space for your fingers. Okay. You'll use a 13 millimeter wrench to hold the nut and tighten the bolt. And plug it in. Ta-da! I already explained it in another video, but you're supposed to put this donuts here. So remove the heat shield first. And it's to keep the hose from kinking. You put the donut here and then zip tie it to the hose. Something like that. My hose is very flat, which makes me wonder if this is just empty. All right, back to wiring stuff. You have to decide where you want to put your PCM. One option is to slot it here in the battery box, which is the location where the TD5 ECUs go. It's not bad. You could figure out a mount to put it here where the secondary air was, or cut a 2-inch hole with a hole saw. You run your harness through here and you can install it either inside the glove box or even maybe run it under the seat. I'm not sure if it would fit there, but well, if you don't have the CD reader thing, you've got a few options. If you want it to be inside the cab and stay away from the elements. Otherwise, my plan is to go here. Might seem like my plan is foiled already because it doesn't quite fit because of those cooling fins. Do you think it'll be an issue if I just trim these back a 1/4 inch? I don't think it'll overheat just because of that, right? Only one way to find out. Cool, fits snugly now. Okay, so the harness is gonna plug in there. There we go. That way, right? Just gonna start laying it over here. Find your injector plugs. That should give you an idea of where things go. The longer branch is on the driver's side. Shorter branch is over there. See, one thing I liked about the BP Automotive harness is that everything was labeled. But on this PSI conversion one, nothing's labeled. So it's a little bit harder to understand what you're looking at. Yeah, so the harness goes in, and there's 2 bolts securing. It would be cool if we could put the entire fuse box in here as well. That's crazy, nothing's labeled. Is this what, like an ignition switch wire or something? Just like any standalone wiring harness, you're gonna have a bundle of wires here. This bundle of wires is what would normally go to your dashboard, and it supplies things like tachometer, other signals. We're going to use the tachometer from here for sure, and maybe a couple other things. We'll see. There's a ground that needs to be grounded. Before I put the intake in here, I want to get a couple connections out of the way. So first, I want to make sure I hook up my fuel line adapter. So I hooked up my AN line, fuel line adapter, and that's going to click into the fuel rail. Parts for this are in the parts list. So you assemble your hose and you just click it into the fuel hose of the Rover. Also, don't lose track of this, which is the evap line, which we will reconnect to the evap purge valve of the LS later. Down here, I want to plug in the camshaft position sensor. Might be this one. Yeah, it fits, so it must be right. We have a ground. You see that? That needs to go where we put the ground strap behind the head. That needs to go there too. Okay, I got that ground hooked up there, and that's really dictating where this wire harness can go. Knock sensor wires, those are supposed to come out the back, and that's my plug for those right there. I don't know, might as well plug it. What else we got? Square plug. This is O2 sensors. On the BP Automotive, I think it's a flat plug for the O2 sensors. So in the back of the intake, I've got the map sensor. I think I want to plug that in before I fully install it. And there's a hose like this here on this hose barb for the brake booster. So I might just find a hose that fits and put it on there in advance. Okay, like that, so I don't have to figure out the hose later. I like to hit the area with a vacuum, go inside the intake ports just in case something fell in there. Before I totally shove it back, I'm gonna find the map sensor plug. It's a 3-pin. Oh, okay, found it. Coming off the branch where the injector plugs are on this side. where one of the bolts of the AC lines is just hitting this edge of the intake right here, which is kind of dumb. I'll just shave it down right now. Okay, got it in. Now take your 10 intake bolts, stick them in there. Now tighten them down with a 10mm socket. You can use an extension and a wobble. There is a torque spec on these intake bolts. It's 44 inch-pounds on the first pass and 89 inch-pounds on the second pass. There's also a torque sequence. It's basically like a middle out star pattern. Okay, time to plug in our fuel injectors. 4 on each side, so okay, there's this bulkhead plug here that goes to your coils on this side. Okay, that's all the fuel injectors. One of these is our coolant temperature sensor, which is down here. I think it's this oval 2-pin. I think that goes down. Plug in to the coolant temperature sensor. The LS coolant temperature sensor, of course, that's on this side. Yep, that fit. We got that going there. That's our alternator plug. As you can see, it's not going to reach. So, what to do about the alternator, which does not reach because the wiring harness is assuming you have the alternator on this side. So what do? Well, ideally, you contacted BP Automotive or whoever, and you ask them to either extend the alternator wires or put them on the other side for you. You tell them, I have the alternator on the other side of the vehicle. Can you just make a wiring harness for me that way? And they'll do it for you. It just will be a custom harness and it won't be returnable. Or take your soldering iron and extend the wires yourself if you'd like. Or you can buy from ICT Billet a 3-foot alternator wire extension. But it's like $36. So, but hey, since I have it here, because I wanted to show you, I'll use it. Okay, so I have 3 things I haven't plugged in yet on this side. The 3-pin connector, throttle position sensor, 4-pin connector, idle air, and this green 5-pin connector, that's our mass airflow. That's for later. Okay, so on this side, every plug is accounted for. We have our O2 sensors down here, which I'm actually going to leave the O2 sensor plug dangling. Now we plug in our bulkhead for the coils. That's the harness on this side. This is our oxygen sensors, which I will leave dangling for later. We'll run them down later. I'm only just finding out I have a map of the harness in the back with what everything is. All right, we don't have that much left to account for. So over here, PSI conversion has 2 positive wire terminals, and this is our crankshaft position sensor with green, yellow, blue wires. So crankshaft position sensor and these red wires are on the same branch, which makes me think the intent for you to run these red terminals to the starter power terminal, and so it'll get power from there. So we have a little branch with these 2 wires. This small purple green one, that's the vehicle speed sensor. So GM vehicle speed sensor, that's great. We're going to backfeed Rover vehicle speed sensor data into this. And this one, I'm not sure what it is, but I think it might be related to the transmission. I chose T56 transmission for my wiring harness, and it came with this. I don't know if I had chosen non-electric, maybe it wouldn't have come with this at all. But anyway, I can just ignore it. I don't think I need it. Let's install this throttle body and plug stuff in. This aftermarket intake has these studs. Cool, so with the throttle body on, what can we plug in? We can plug in throttle position sensor and idle air control. If you want, you can route them through here. Actually, we should route them through there. That way they won't be in the way of the intake tubing as much. Alright, I took the starter out just so you could see that the crankshaft position sensor is over here. That's where that plugs in. We're going to make sure to zip tie the wire and route it away from the exhaust and exhaust manifold. Starter back on. Now on the solenoid there will be a post, a battery terminal post, with a nut and a spring washer. Remove the nut and the spring washer and put these right there. You will also bring your fat battery cable over to here. So don't tighten that nut just yet. Okay, done. Now these wires being so close to the exhaust, you should really consider zip tying them away and putting some heat shielding around them. So before going under the dash, I'm going to take care of everything else that I can take care of here. I think I'm done plugging stuff into the engine. Ground. I'm going to hook that up to one of these ground posts here. There's also that ground from the Rover harness that has a nut built into it. So actually this ground wire from the Rover harness, the nut doesn't fit on anything. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it off and I'm going to crimp on this terminal, which is a crimp and shrink wrap terminal all in one. These are nice. I like them. You can find some that are just crimp, kind of like these. I like that it crimps and it shrink wraps. So cut the wire. And crimp. Put those grounds in. So while we're still up here, I think there's one last thing to take care of. It's the TPS, throttle position sensor. This is the Rover TPS wires. We need to backfeed the throttle position sensor signal from the LS to the Rover. So you're gonna have to like convert that signal in some other way, and I haven't looked into that yet, just so you know. For our purposes, it's pretty easy. We just want to connect this signal wire, which is the yellow and green one coming off the Rover TPS plug, and we want to connect that to a three-way splice on the LS throttle position sensor wire, which is on a red-blue PCM. It is red connector, pin number 24, and on my harness that's a yellow wire. Okay, this yellow wire. All right, I wanted a little bit more space to make that splice, so I peeled off some of the loom, removed a round of tape, and there's my LS throttle position sensor signal. And I wanted to make a three-way splice with this and this. So how do we do that? Well, first I'm going to take my Rover wires and I'm going to keep that TPS label here, and I'm going to snip off the connector, maybe. Okay, I did it. All right, TPS yellow with green stripe with my red pin 24 yellow wire. Strip my yellow and green stripe about 3/4 of an inch, like a good length. Okay, decide how you want the Rover wire to approach. If you want it to approach this way, that's fine. So twist these two wires together. And I got a decent piece of shrink wrap here. I got one that's not too thin because we're going over two wires now. Okay, try to pull that shrink wrap away from the solder joint so it doesn't get too hot and accidentally shrink. Twist all the wires together, and now I'm gonna bring my soldering iron here. Nice. After it's cooled down, shrink wrap. I'm gonna tape it back the way it was. There. That's the throttle position done. Okay, now what to do with these dangling red wires? Just cap them off. I like having the TPS sticking out like that. That's reminds me what it was. TPS done. always recommend reading the instructions from the wiring harness. It states that from this fuse box, there's this coiled up red wire, and that needs to go to a 12-volt ignition switched power supply. So it needs to be on only when the car is on. So I'm gonna give you two options for ignition power. Under here, Rover ECU, the first connector, the 9-pin connector, the far one. Pin number 1, it's like a white wire, or in my case it's kind of beige like. Anyway, this is ignition position 2, switched power. This is what powers the Rover ECU. So you can make a 3-way splice out of this and power your LS, ECU, and Golden Rovers box from this. Probably no fuse required because this should already be a fused power. That's one option, you can tap into that. But if you don't want to mess with the ECU wires, then you can find power here in this fuse box. Just test the row of fuses with the ignition on 1 and test it again with the ignition on 2. And I found that this second 20 amp fuse here is ignition position 2 powered. So I pulled that fuse and added it to my fuse tap. So now I have ignition position 2 power, and I need to bring it to the other side. I'm gonna have to run a wire through here, or just tucked in under here to try to get to the other side somehow. I decided to make all the connections here because it's just all here and it's more convenient. So from that ECU plug, 3-way splice to a little red wire. That red wire goes 2 ways. One to the Golden Rover box, and the other, that's the red wire coming from the LS ECU. Now, don't forget to plug this back in to the Rover ECU. And now we have this beautiful bundle of wires. So I couldn't figure out what all of these wires are, but I at least know the ones we care about. So the white one is tachometer signal from the LS. We're going to want that to connect to the Golden Rovers box. Then there's a brown, which is the check engine light ground. We're going to need that. What we're going to do is we're going to connect the check engine light from the LS to the dashboard of the Rover. What else we got? So we got dark green and dark blue. Those are for electric fans. So you can keep those for potential future upgrade if you want to go to electric fans. Purple is TCC, brake signal. I don't believe we need to do that. There's an orange one, not required. It's the ground in park and neutral. Black is speed output. We don't need that. The dashboard is already getting speedometer from the transfer case. And we've got a gray and a beige, and those are not labeled or indicated. So I don't know what they are, but I don't believe we need them. So really all we care about is this white one, tachometer, and this brown one, which is check engine light. But we'll want to run these two wires under the dash because the check engine light is going to have to hook up there. And the tachometer signal, well, I plan on putting the Golden Rovers box under the dash so it's protected from the elements. And it needs the tachometer signal, so we'll run that to there. In fact, take a look at your Golden Rovers box and see what it needs. It needs 12 volts switched. So just like this fuse box needed 12 volts switched, this needs that too. It needs a ground. Ground is very easy. You just tie that to the body, even under the dash. It needs crankshaft position, negative. We already have that. We ran the crankshaft, the Rover crank position wires under the dash. I feel like I should change these labels to say Rover crank position, just to be very clear. We've got crank position positive, same thing. That's the wires we already ran under the dash when we did the Rover harness. LS TAC, we already talked about the tachometer. Rover VSS, Rover Vehicle Speed Sensor. That's already under the dash by the Rover ECU. And then the LS Vehicle Speed Sensor, positive and negative. Those are here. Remember, so in our PSI conversion harness, we had this oval 2-wire plug with a green and purple. That is the LS Vehicle Speed Sensor signal. So we want to run this under the dash too. If you look down, there's an unused grommet here. It's just a plug. I think it's used for right-hand drive manual transmission vehicles. So there's just a grommet there. You can just drill a hole into the grommet and run wires through there. So now it's time to gather up all the wires we want to send under the dash. So I've got from the bundle, white and brown. Everything else is going to stay white and brown, and we've got a piece of wiring harness with the two LS VSS wires, green and purple. I want to make a very important point that you should always look up the pinouts for your PCM on lt1swap.com. I am reading off the pin numbers for a red and blue PCM, but if you have the green-blue, it's going to be completely different, right? So don't just splice into whatever I tell you to. Just double check, especially if you're using a different PCM. Now, to get the wires into the grommet that goes there, I pull it out, and I want to punch a hole in the middle. Sometimes I use a big drill bit. And to make my life easy, I could run the wires through the grommet right now, over here. There's a couple of them. My white, my brown, my red, the vehicle speed sensor. So I'm gonna undo a little bit of this wiring harness to separate the vehicle speed sensor. Okay, I've removed the loom off of the LS VSS green and purple wires because I want to put them into this grommet. So I'm going to cut off the connector now. There, I think that's all of the wires that I was intending on running to the inside. So let me install this grommet. Shoving the wires in and reapply the grommet to the hole. There. So yeah, I ran those wires in. The VSS wires teeing off like that. From inside the vehicle, I pulled all the wires in. So they're all here. Tachometer, check engine light, switched power, and LS vehicle speed sensor. And of course we have the Rover crankshaft position sensor, which are already here from before. Okay, under the dash time. So I've got all my wires here and the crankshaft position sensor wire. And I don't know how long they're going to be because I don't have the final length in the engine bay yet and how I'm going to route them. So I don't want to cut them too short, but I guess I could cut them to the length of the vehicle speed sensor wire since we're not going to go any longer than that. So, there we go. So I'm stripping all the wires and got to the crankshaft position sensor one. And you'll see, if you remember, this was a 3-wire plug. Well, one of the 3 wires is just this copper shield. If you pull back that shield, you only have 2 wires. Your orange, positive, or sometimes it's pink if they're faded, and your black, negative, crankshaft position sensor. Like that. Now I have a clean orange and black wires. Okay, now we want to start connecting things to our Golden Rovers box. If it's helpful to you, you can unplug the box and connect the wires that way. Some earlier models of the Golden Rovers box had push-in connectors or spring connectors where you push the button here, insert your wire, and it holds the wire in place. A little bit easier to connect. But for the new model, you're going to have to solder or crimp the wires, whatever you prefer. I'm going to use my favorite crimp and heat shrink connectors since I've had good luck with them. And that way I don't have to bring soldering iron all the way here. Okay, I've wired almost everything that I could, everything that comes out of the dash. We've got crank position positive to the orange wire of the crank position negative to the black wire from the crank position rover wire. Next, LS tachometer to the white wire that comes in, and LS VSS, vehicle speed sensor. So VSS negative is the green wire, and VSS positive is the purple wire. So that only leaves 2 wires of the Golden Rovers box that haven't been connected yet. We've got the Rover VSS and the ground. So the ground is really easy. We just need to put a loop terminal over here and hook it up to any ground on the body, literally any screw or bolt. Or specifically, you can go and look for that ground. There's a ground post right there with a bunch of grounds attached to it, so you can tap into that. So make yourself a little pigtail like this. Loop terminal onto some black wire harvested from the Rover wiring harness. Attach the loop to the terminal there, and attach that to the ground wire on the the Golden Rovers box. Now I've left the best for last. The Rover VSS is going to come from a 3-way splice from one of these connectors. I wrote it down for myself. Our VSS, the Rover VSS is going to come from connector C0637, pin number 22, and it's supposed to be a tan green wire. So, all of our ECU connectors are here. C0637 is a 40-pin connector. So I'm looking at my connectors. This one's got 52 pins. That's the bigger one. They're all different number of pins. This one's got 40 pins. They all have a different number of pins. So if it's got 40 pins, it's got to be the right one. And the pins are sort of numbered. We're looking for 22. There's 21. So 22. 21 is not used, and 22 is this one. Indeed, it is tan with a green stripe. That's our wire, tan and a green stripe. So there, 40 pin connector, tan green wire, pin number 22. So this is another situation where we need to make a 3-way splice, and this is a tight spot to do that. So when making a 3-way splice, you can do just like the last one I showed you, where you cut, you put your shrink wrap, you splice the 3 wires together, solder and shrink. Or you might be tempted to use one of those T-splice things. But in my experience, those things don't last very long. They don't make a very secure connection. So for critical stuff, those will come apart. I'm going to use another crimp for this 3-wire splice because there's not a lot of length in these wires to work with. And when you're soldering, you need to twist the wires together, which shortens the length of the wire. But not the case with the crimp. So on the one side of the crimp, I'm going to crimp 2 of the wires. And on the other side, I'm going to crimp the 3rd wire, and that way I'm going to have a 3-way crimp. Maybe I'll twist them together a little bit. You also don't have to cut as much wire when you're crimping, and I definitely only needed to strip a 1/4 inch, but I've stripped a little more than that, so I had to cut back. But okay. Now the other side. There we go. There's our 3-way splice of the Rover VSS. And there it is, guys. Rover VSS is connected. And that is all of the wires for the Golden Rovers box. So let's plug it back in. There is one final thing we need to do under the dash, and that's the check engine light. Obviously not required for the car to run and stuff, but if you were to run the car without doing this, your check engine light will be on because the Rover ECU is throwing all sorts of check engine lights since it has no engine. Instead, you would rather have the check engine light turned on when the LS ECU has a fault, right? So that's what we're going to do. This is the LS ECU check engine light signal, and we're going to cut off the Rover check engine light and hook it up to this instead. This is a little easier because we don't have to do a 3-way splice. Just a normal splice will suffice. So, same 40-pin connector. This time we're looking for pin number 20. That one is labeled 20. And it's a red-brown wire in principle. Pin 20. It's a red... to me it looks more like a red-gray. For me it's like a... almost like a bluish gray, but I think it's a red gray. That's the check engine light wire. Red gray. So this wire you're gonna cut maybe an inch away from the connector, 1.5 inches, like not too far, not super close, but not too far either. Because all we're gonna do is put a little shrink tubing on it and cap it off. Don't lose the other end. And we're gonna connect that to our brown wire that we brought in from the LS bundle. Good. Now we'll go around and heat shrink all the butt splices I just made. Okay, and with that done wiring under here, all that's left to do is plug the ECU connectors back in. And, well, they go in order, and they only go in one way and in one place, so you can't really mess it up. So, plug back all of your Land Rover ECU connectors. Done with the underdash wiring. That's exciting. So, what now? Are we done? Well, we're done with the hard part, definitely. Now, there's a little bit of tidying up we need to do. So, coil up these extra wires and terminate them for safety. You know, once you have your wires routed the way you want, then you might want to loom the wires going under the dash. So, next is the battery cables and the starter ignition wire. So, got two battery cables. This one goes from the big fuse box to the alternator. And this one goes from the big fuse box to the battery to the starter. So, which one do we want to do first? Let's do the starter battery fuse box one first. So, starting with the fuse box connection. This hooks up to the battery here, like this. That goes like that to the battery, like I did before. And into the battery box we go. Now the alternator one. So that is, this end goes into the battery, into the fuse box. So get in there. Oh no, we should have done it the other way around. Do the alternator wire first, the alternator cable first. Do the alternator cable first because the other one goes over it. Otherwise they get in each other's way. There they are. There, the two cables are back where they should be. So the alternator cable, now, way longer than feels absolutely necessary, but this longer is better than shorter. And always tuck some of that length away. And we want to reconnect the alternator cable to the alternator. So let's remove the nut that is on the alternator. And if we're lucky, and we're not lucky, it is not the same thread. So what you can do is you can crimp a new terminal to this big old cable, or you can maybe remove this nut somehow. That nut is like riveted in there, so I'm going to hold it with pliers and just try to drill it out. I don't know what else to do. There we go, it's out. Okay, now we have a normal a normal battery terminal. Hooray! So, and we put that battery terminal on the alternator and put the nut came with the alternator. The oil filter neck is in the way, just pop that right off. Okay, alternator is hooked up. Our battery cables are right here. Now, the starter. So, remember we have this ignition wire and from the Rover, right? So this, it will activate your starter when you turn your key. And Rover included it with this like connector that goes onto a spade. But the starter that I provided you needs something like this, like a loop terminal. So I'm gonna have to, we've done a few of these now, but snip off that connector and put a loop terminal right over here. Yep, one of these. Now, if you recall from the last video, I said I kind of wanted to run this along with the starter wire or the starter cable that leaves from the battery cable. I also want to re-loom this, and I thought, yeah, maybe I can loom them together. I mean, that's kind of how it was with the original wiring harness, Rover wiring harness. It was loomed together. So why not do that again? So now let's send this cable down and we'll hook it up. Thought it would be super difficult to film under the car to show you. But basically the big terminal needs to go to this battery terminal. This is max torque 45 inch-pounds. So keep that in mind. There's a nut and the spring washer. You have to take both of them out. Remember, we have also those battery terminals from the wiring harness, the LS wiring harness, also go here. So make sure you remove your nut and your spring washer. You put the terminal or terminals from the LS wiring harness on here. Then you put the terminal coming from the battery, spring washer, and tighten your nut to 45 inch-pounds. Then the ignition wire, to which we added a terminal loop, goes to this little screw here. Okay? Simple. I did it, and that's what that looks like. Big cable connected to the terminal, and this little ignition wire to the little screw on top. And I've zip tied it to this, and there's plenty of extra length in the battery cable, so we're gonna have to tuck that away somewhere. It's time to tidy up a few things. So I put some double-sided mounting tape on the Golden Rovers box. So I'm gonna peel this double-sided mounting tape, and I'm gonna reach over. I'm gonna go over top of the Rover ECU and stick it there. There's room up there. Now, if you wanted, you could put some loom around these wires, zip tie them, tape them, whatever. But you can basically stick them to the side and put your panel back in. Just like this. I've loomed the wires going from the LS harness into the cab. I've also loomed the little ignition wire that goes to the starter. Now, if I want to tidy this up, based on what I'm seeing with the packaging, I don't want to cut the battery box. Instead, I might want to cut a hole in the lid. I don't have a lid for this car actually, but once I get one, I think I'm gonna have to cut a circular hole in the lid for the wires to come in like that. Remember the coolant temperature sensor on the radiator? This one down here. And I wasn't sure what it was for or if it was necessary. Well, I learned that coolant temperature is what triggers the air conditioning auxiliary electric fan to turn on when the coolant temperature is high enough on the radiator to add extra cooling to the radiator. So it is useful and necessary to plug in that temperature sensor on the radiator. So make sure you keep it. Well, that's going to do it for this video, guys. Now that all of your wiring is done, assuming you got your PCM back from being programmed, you should be able to start this thing. You just have to hook up your fuel, hook up a few things. That's what this next video is going to be. We're going to start this engine. So stay tuned and I'll see you there.